Greetings and welcome to the University of Minnesota Alumni Association's webinar series. My name is John Ruzek and I'm the Senior Director of Alumni Networks and your host today. Thanks to everyone who's joined us live. We're going to be talking about resumes and how to build a compelling one during the job search. But first, a few quick announcements. Today's webinar is part of an ongoing free series being offered by the University of Minnesota Alumni Association, where we're talking about career, life, and learning topics like this. And initiatives like this are made possible in part by our Alumni Association members. And so thank you very much. And if you're interested in becoming a member, you can visit us at the URL website below. Also, today is Give to the Max Day in Minnesota, Minnesota's annual 24-hour online giving event. And if you'd like to give a gift to the Alumni Association or any other part of the university, you can do so today. Our link to the Give to the Max is there as well, and I believe the generic U of M link is givingday.umn.edu. But any tax-deductible gift to the university is appreciated and goes to support our alumni work and also research and student scholarship. Upcoming webinars coming up after Thanksgiving on December 1st, we have the Dress for Career Success webinar. And then on December 7th, we have a Ask a Career Coach open Q&A webinar as well. And you can sign up for those at umnalumni.org/virtual. And then lastly, today's webinar is in partnership with our friends at the Carlson School of Management. And our presenter is one of the career coaches in their Graduate Business Career Center. The University of Minnesota is a great place for a graduate and professional degree in a variety of areas. And the Carlson School of Management does have quite a few MBAs and also Master of Accountancy, HRIR, and some really exciting ones in business analytics as well that are coming online. So definitely check that out, carlsonschool.umn.edu/programs. A couple housekeeping items about using GoToWebinar. Before we get started, you have joined the presentation listening using your computer speakers system by default. If you would prefer to listen over the telephone, just select telephone in the audio pane of your GoToWebinar panel and dial-in information will be displayed. If you experience audio difficulties while listening via your computer speakers, this can be caused by having multiple software applications open, which can use up your computer's bandwidth and affect performance. Also, if you're on a wireless signal, that might affect things too, so maybe move over to a hardwired Ethernet connection. The question pane on your GoToWebinar panel. This is how you can ask a question at any time. The presenter today, Stephen, is definitely open to your questions about resumes as they come through. So feel free to type them in to the questions box. And this will be a real free-flowing conversation. We look forward to everyone's input. First, I do want to welcome Stephen Glom, who's the Senior Associate Director and Career Coach for the Carlson School of Management's Graduate Business Career Center. He has 15 plus years of experience providing executive and leadership development coaching with a focus on working with first-time and emerging leaders, middle managers, and seasoned executives. And Stephen, just want to say hello to you. Your mic should be live now.
Yeah, I think it is.
All right.
Okay.
Yep. And also, I think I'm going to make this work here. I believe we have our next, the person who will be a panelist with us today, Rob Worthington, who's a recruiting manager with Robert Half Finance and Accounting, who's also a current MBA student at the Carlson School. And he'll be providing some color commentary and insights along with Stephen about the resume process. Hello, Rob. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you just fine, John.
All right. Thank you so much for being here today.
Well, thanks for having me. Looking forward to it.
All right. Well, I'm going to switch over to Stephen's presentation now and let him take it from here.
Awesome. Thanks a lot, John. So I think you stole most of my intro from me. But for those of you who are just joining the call, my name is Stephen Glom. I'm a Senior Associate Director and a Career Coach in the Graduate Business Career Center here at the Carlson School of Management. As John noted, I have been doing this work or similar work for about 15 years. I've been at Carlson for the last 7, and in this role I really work with students across all of our graduate business programs, helping them achieve success in their job search and in their careers. And in that time, I have probably critiqued thousands upon thousands of resumes. So I work in a full-time capacity in the Career Center, and then I also teach career development here at the Carlson School of Management as well. So I assume we probably have a nice mix of some undergraduate and grad alumni, so maybe even some familiar faces out there. I'm really pleased to have Rob introduce himself as well. He's graciously joined us here on the call today to share some of his insights into the recruiting process and really share his wisdom about what he thinks goes into a compelling resume. And as John noted, Rob's a recruiter with Robert Half International, and I'd like to welcome him. So, you want to give a brief intro and a little background into you and your career, Rob?
Sure, Stephen, I'd be happy to do that. Yeah, so I've been a part-time MBA at the U of M since 2013, which actually predates my time here at Robert Half. I joined Robert Half early 2014, so I'm coming up on 3 years within Robert Half, but 3.5 years into my MBA program, and I will be graduating in the spring, so I'm excited to put a nice tidy bow on my MBA over there at the Carlson School of Management. As we all know on the call here, Carlson School of Management really does promote networking, and a lot of on-campus recruiting goes on over there. As a recruiting manager here within Robert Half, my specialty is on the higher level finance and accounting jobs. I do a lot of the 6-figure jobs on finance and accounting, so that would include corporate controllers, directors of finance, senior tax managers, audit managers, but also some of the lighter level staff accountant, senior accountant, financial analyst jobs. So in any event, to this stage of my career, I've probably placed over 60, 65 people into full-time direct hire roles here in the Twin Cities for the most part. However, our territory is pretty broad, so I've also placed a few people in North and South Dakota and even parts of Wisconsin. So, but yeah, I've always worked in the direct hire perm role, so whenever I help somebody find a job, it really is for the long term. My goal here is to find somebody a great long-term home, and when I plug them into a company, that's all I'm rooting for, is that they're going to be happy, stick, stay, enjoy the ride, and hopefully get promoted.
Yeah. Great. Well, the reason that I wanted to have Rob on this call is because, Rob, I know from working with you, you have a ton of insight into what the recruiting process looks like behind the scenes from a recruiter's perspective. So I'm going to kind of take the lead here with the presentation, but please jump in, and I'll probably ask you to jump in here and there throughout the presentation. And then, as John noted, I am really open to questions throughout the presentation. Hopefully we'll have time at the end for a broader Q&A, but I feel like if there's something on your mind, don't hesitate to ask it before we move on. So,
Great.
All right, let's go ahead and get started. So before I sit down and work on a resume with any student, I really like them to have a good understanding of what this process looks like behind the scenes. And I like to share a few guiding principles. And so the first guiding principle for me is that there really is a limit to how much information you can convey on just 1 or even 2 pieces of paper. So keep in mind, recruiters are incredibly busy. They are looking to do their work extremely efficiently. And what we hear is that most of them are looking for resumes for about 20 or 30 seconds. And Rob, I'm not going to put you on the spot and ask you if that's true. I've got enough data from other recruiters who are telling us that they're really looking at these for about 20 or 30 seconds. And so what that means for you as you're writing your resume is that you really need to be strategic about what's important and what's not important. So I like to encourage people to think of themselves a bit as a curator when you're writing your resume. We know that you all have tons to offer. You have a lot of experiences and skills that you want to show off. But really, there's just no possible way to share it all on 1 or even 2 pages. So that's kind of our first guiding principle. A second guiding principle that I like to share is really to remind people that this is a marketing piece. When you're going on the job market, you really do need to think of yourself as a product, one that has key features, key selling points that really only you have to offer. So I point that out because it's really important to know 2 things. You need to know who you're selling to and what they're looking for, what they need. And then you also need to know what you're selling. So that's second guiding principle. Third guiding principle that I remind people is that It's generally not a good practice to try and offer a little bit of something to everybody. Some people think that that's a good practice or a good idea because it'll allow them to appeal to a wider audience. If they put a little bit of everything out there, sometimes they think, well, this is going to make me look more well-rounded. Generally, what I find with students is that what it leads to is a really confusing and kind of very diffused snapshot of who you are. And then further, there aren't that many recruiters out there who are kind of looking for that jack of all trades. Most recruiters have a really clear picture in their mind of what it is they're looking for talent-wise. And so for you, one of the goals in putting together a good resume is figuring out what your strongest skills and experiences are and then just really selling those. And then the last thing that I like to remind people is that the resume is really a lot like an agenda. It's an agenda for an interview that you might have someday down the road. So you need to keep that in mind and really think thoughtfully about whether everything on your resume is something that you'd want to talk about during an interview. If it's on the resume, I'm assuming recruiters like Rob kind of see that as fair game, and so they're going to ask you about it. So I encourage you to really think thoughtfully about whether that's how you want to spend maybe your precious 30 or 60 minutes of that interview time. Rob, anything to add there?
No, I think that's a good overview, Stephen. I would echo that. A lot of recruiters are quite busy, and they're only going to spend 20 to 30 seconds, combing a resume and kind of getting that quick overview for somebody's background. And it absolutely is a piece of marketing collateral. It is a living, breathing document. It's a single or 2 pages of paper. Very important, but it's only step one, and that's just essentially to get you in the door. So you want to position yourself according to the type of job or opportunity that you're best aligned for. For us here at Robert Half, it's tough to, put a round peg into a square hole. So typically what we would say is, your experience and your degree should align well with what you're looking towards in your next step.
Yeah.
So.
All right. Well, I'll ask you a couple of follow-up questions throughout.
Sure. Yeah.
Next slide. So I kind of have broken this down into a 3-step process, and I consider this really as pre-work before you sit down and construct your resume. A lot of times people just want to jump right in and start getting something onto paper, and I get it. I understand why that makes you feel like you're making some progress, but I feel like the mistake that people make is that they just start dumping everything onto a piece of paper, and they really haven't taken the time to think about a few things. So the first thing I want you to make sure you are thinking about is your audience. So step one is really knowing your audience. And here a little bit of background research can really go a long way. I think it's important to have some basic information about the landscape of opportunities that are out there so that you have a good understanding of your audience and really what they're looking for. So I generally encourage people to spend a couple of hours looking around online. You can look on LinkedIn, you can look on Indeed, and what I'm having them look for are job postings. Job postings that are reflective of the types of roles that they're going to be pursuing with this resume. And I go so far as to say, print out 5, 6, 7 of these job descriptions and lay them all out in front of you and take a highlighter and literally highlight keywords, key phrases, skills and competencies that are coming up. And after you've done that over the course of 6 or 7 job descriptions, undoubtedly you'll start to see themes. But what you've done then is you've kind of created a little bit of like a lexical bank almost of those key industry phrases and terms that you're going to want to then sprinkle throughout your resume. So job postings are absolutely key. You've got to understand what your audience is looking for, and more importantly, what language, what vernacular they're using to talk about those things, so that you can really kind of talk the talk. Company websites obviously are super useful here. Browsing LinkedIn profiles. This is a really, really great tip. For those of you who are just getting started putting together a resume, if you are going after let's say a senior financial analyst position, there is a wealth of data out there about what a senior financial analyst looks like. And so by doing an advanced search in LinkedIn and pulling up some profiles of other senior financial analysts, you can really get a good understanding of how you need to brand yourself and how you need to think about yourself and start describing your skills and sort of describing your experiences to your audience. And then last, informational interviewing is a really great way to gather data on the job landscape. By meeting with people who are in your target industries or your target functions, maybe even your target companies, you can really get a good idea of, again, that specific language, the lingo, the buzzwords, before you sit down and write your resume. So that's kind of step one, knowing your audience, knowing the landscape, knowing what people out there in the marketplace are actually looking for. So once you've completed step one, then you can move on to step two, and this is really more about you and taking inventory of what you have to offer. So here, obviously, in addition to thinking about what skills and experiences you want to talk about, I also encourage people to really think about things like crowning achievements, proud moments from work, specific projects that you've completed that were particularly successful. Too often people just sit down and they're going to write their resume and they pull out their old job descriptions. And they start cutting and pasting their roles and their responsibilities kind of straight onto the document. And this is a fine start, and I sometimes have people do this just as an exercise, but I'd like you to think less about kind of what was in your job description and focus a little bit more on what you actually accomplished. So a good exercise can actually be to pull out old performance reviews. So instead of pulling out job descriptions of your previous roles, what about pulling out your old performance reviews and really taking a deep dive and a look at what sorts of things you, in a sense, were bragging about throughout the course of your career. This can be a really good exercise to get you away from just regurgitating what you were kind of getting paid to do, what was in your job description, and moving toward showcasing those experiences, those projects, those crowning achievements that you're most proud of. So step one is kind of know the landscape, know the marketplace, know what people are looking for, and then step two is taking inventory of what you have, which leads us then to step three, which is really getting focused. So I encourage people here to really focus on that overlap between the research that they did, all the data that they've gathered during step one, and all of the inventory that they took during step two, laying those things down side by side and then seeing where there's overlap. When you do this, what you're going to find is that there's actually a lot of things that you might be tempted to include because you're having a really hard time letting them go. Or there are experiences that were really, really important to you that you really want an opportunity to talk about. But you have to keep going back to this idea that you're a product that you are trying to sell, you're trying to market, and that your audience has certain things that they want and need. So think about the importance of really, really getting focused, looking really at only including those things that can be found in the intersection between kind of what you have to offer and what your audience wants and needs. So that's kind of my basic three-step process. Again, Rob, anything that you'd add there?
No, I think you hit on a lot of the big keys there, Stephen. In terms of getting focused, what I would, again, going back to kind of a lot of the HR professionals or recruiters that are going to review the resume initially are going to take a 20 to 30-second glimpse at it. So getting focused and aligning what you have to offer in terms of prior experience and education along with what your audience wants and needs is critical, and tying that into those keywords within each and every job description or company. And some people, I think, especially as executive MBA level, with people that have maybe 15, 20, 25 plus years of experience, it can be tempting to put a lot into your resume and go on to a second, third, fourth, fifth, sixth, eighth, 10th page. I've seen 10-page resumes. That's not ideal. What I would say about getting focused is narrowing that a little bit, leaning it down, 1-2 pages, really targeting what that audience really wants and needs in that ideal candidate.
Yeah, and then I tell people, get everything else out of the way. You know, if it's
Right.
if it's on the resume and it's not speaking to the recruiter and what he or she has expressly stated they are looking for, then it actually can do some harm, right? It does more harm than good, certainly, because it gets in the way. If you're spending
Yes.
20 or 30 seconds on that resume, you don't want to have to read through a bunch of fluff that doesn't really speak to you and isn't addressing, your talent needs at your organization. So a lot of times people will say, well, can I add this on the resume? I kind of want to get credit for it. And I say, well, that's fine. But again, if the recruiter isn't actually looking for that, it's just getting in their way. And if they're going to give you 20 or 30 seconds, you want every single thing on that resume to be super, super potent. I use that word a lot about potency. It's important that every single thing kind of be really, really concentrated and potent so that your resume doesn't end up getting really diffused and watered down.
Yeah.
So on the next slide, John, if you'll advance, I've captured some recruiter complaints. At the Graduate Business Career Center here at Carlson, we did a survey of all of our corporate recruiting partners several years back. And I'm not going to go through all of these, but they are just some things to keep in mind. When we asked recruiters what were some of the kind of common pet peeves or complaints that they were seeing on students' resumes, these are the things that came up. And so some of these are obvious. Errors, poor grammar, that's all completely unacceptable. Resumes that are too long, that have long, dense paragraphs, we don't want to see that. But things like, too duty-oriented. A resume that really just helps me understand or regurgitates back what your duties or your responsibilities were isn't really enough. Because what you're basically communicating if you're doing that is that I did my job. I did the bare minimum. I didn't necessarily achieve or accomplish anything. I didn't really bring about or drive any results. I just kind of came in and did my job. So these are some of the complaints that we see, and again, not going to go into all of them, but keep those things in the back of your mind as well as you're sitting down to put together your resume or maybe revise your resume after it's been gathered in some dust.
Hey, Stephen, can I just add, we had a question kind of come in
Okay.
regarding kind of recruiters' perceptions of resumes. The person asked, which do recruiters want, functional or chronological resumes?
Yeah. I have a strong opinion about it, so I'm going to take that one, Rob, if you don't mind. Functional resumes, I think, in the past have been a decent alternative for people who didn't necessarily have very relevant work experience, or they had some gaps in their employment, or they were kind of trying to fit a square peg into a round hole, right? So they didn't necessarily have what a recruiter was looking for, so they kind of faked it a little bit by taking all of their experiences, de-emphasizing employers, de-emphasizing job titles, and really focusing on what transferable skills they developed. And in theory, it sounds like a really good idea, and I understand why they were popular for some time. It actually is one of the, I don't know if you noticed, it is one of the recruiter complaints that we see when we survey recruiters. So for that reason, we don't recommend them. A functional resume, basically, for all the reasons that I just discussed, I think raises some red flags for recruiters. The chronological resume is what I'm going to talk about today. It's really what is customary and I think the preferred format. And so I think when somebody doesn't follow that preferred format, it just raises some red flags. Rob, what do you guys think?
Yes. I lean very heavily towards chronological resumes as our number one preferred format. When I evaluate a resume for a direct hire permanent placement opportunity, I'm looking for tenure within companies, and I'm looking for a track record of promotion within each and every company somebody has worked at. And if you go to a functional resume, sometimes that gets lost in there. Now, if you want to be a project-based consultant, potentially a functional resume is better. However, for me, again, on direct hire permanent, going into salaried opportunities, with full benefits from day one, chronological really is king.
Yeah, okay, good. I'm glad to hear that. And I like what you added there about what you're looking for as a recruiter, because, yeah, it's true, a functional resume isn't going to allow you to quickly gather some of that important data for you. So, good. All right. Once you've kind of done all of that and you sat down and you focused on this overlap, the big question that we get when I'm sitting down with a student is, should I include it or should I get rid of it? It's such a common question that I actually collected some of my thoughts on kind of what that litmus test is for whether or not it should be on the resume. So for me, I think you should include it if it is relevant to the job that you are applying for. And I have a little note here. I see a real difference between interesting and relevant. Impressive does not necessarily mean relevant. So a lot of times people will want to put things on because, again, they're really, really proud of those experiences. And I'm constantly reminding people, yeah, I get it. I get that this was something that you're really, really proud of. Or here's an experience you had that's really, really, really interesting and makes you unique, but it's not relevant. Or at least I'm having a hard time hearing how it's relevant as you've written it or as you're talking about it. So make sure that it's relevant to the job you're applying for. You should include it if it demonstrates one of the skills that the recruiters have specifically called out in that job description. I think it's good to include things that demonstrate your knowledge of the industry, the function. You want to make sure, I'm not saying you should overuse buzzwords and just have a whole resume filled with buzzwords, but it does go a long way to show that you can kind of talk the talk and you know a little bit about what you're talking about. And then you always want to include any of these three things. So include anything that contains a dollar sign or a number or a percentage sign, because these are really the indicators of results. They show that you made money, or you saved money, or you improved efficiency, or you reduced turnaround time. So think about numbers, dollar signs, percentage signs as those indicators that you actually had an impact. So those are things to include. Things to get rid of, things that aren't relevant to the job that you're applying for. Things that aren't differentiators. So what I mean by that is that most candidates could list that on their resume. One thing we see a lot is Microsoft Office. People will say, well, I want to have a skills section, but I really just have Microsoft Office. And it's like, well, it's kind of assumed at this level that you're going to have basic Microsoft Office skills. Get rid of those things that are part of your day-to-day job. If it's just simply something that you're responsible for doing every day when you punch in on the job, it's probably not the best use of your valuable real estate. And then last, we hear from enough recruiters that they don't really need to see hobbies, personal interests, things like that. Again, a lot of people are tempted to put them on because they think it makes them a little bit more human, it makes them a little bit more relatable. But I think we hear from more recruiters than not that they're not really interested in the hobbies and other personal interests appearing on the resume. So those are kind of my general rules for what to include and what to take off. So I want to kind of break down the remainder of the presentation. I'm going to kind of go through section by section and give some tips and best practices. But I want to say just a little bit about formatting. We often get asked if there's rules about page length. As Rob said, really we expect that most people who have, and I say less than 10 years of work experience, we expect those people to be able to fit their experiences onto a page. 2-page resumes should really be reserved for those people that have, let's say, more than 10 years of work experience. Is that pretty much what you're seeing, Rob?
Yeah, I think that's a fair guideline. 10 years or less, you can squeeze a lot onto a single page. 10 plus, go onto a second page, but try not to go past that page 2. So yes.
Yeah, and because people are looking at things really quickly, just because you give me more than 2 pages, it doesn't mean I'm going to read more than 2 pages. So I also will sit down, a lot of times people will say, I couldn't possibly get all of my experiences and skills onto 1 page. And so they bring in this 3-page document, and we end up going through and taking off half of it because it really isn't relevant or speaking to their audience. So generally, it can be helpful to even have another person look at it and sort of give you their perspective on what they think is important to keep and retain. Sometimes that outside objective third party can be really useful. I'm not going to say too much more about the chronological versus functional resume piece, just because we had that question from the audience. But really, we're talking about the chronological resume format today for 2 reasons. It's best way to show that career progression, the career advancement. We also hear that employers favor this format. So that's what we talk about. That's what we teach here. And in a chronological resume, what you're going to do is you're going to display your most recent experiences first. So you're presenting things kind of in reverse chronological order, but you're going to put those most recent experiences first, and then you're going to work backwards. And then the last thing, just in terms of formatting, people ask questions about what font should I use, how big should my margins be, what size font should I use. You know, I think select a commonly used font, something like a Times New Roman or an Arial. You know, I think that the serif fonts like Times New Roman tend to look a little bit more professional, but that's totally an opinion. I think, you know, 10-point font usually looks pretty nice on a resume. I probably wouldn't go smaller than 9-point font. Otherwise, you know, you really are starting to look like you're just trying to squeeze as much as you can on the resume. And I wouldn't go bigger than 11 ever, because then it looks like you don't have enough to fill a page. You know, make sure that there's some nice white space on the page. Avoid those dense blocks of text. You know, if you look at a resume and it looks like a lot to read, people aren't going to read it. They're just going to simply put you into the no pile, because they're going to assume that you haven't taken the time to tailor this and really address their needs and what they're looking for. So make sure that you're being careful with your formatting. And then just be consistent. So, you know, use one font. It's just a one-page document. So no need to use multiple different types of font. You know, avoid like rule lines and borders and things like that on the resume. Make a clean, easy to read, easy to look at document, and make sure that you're consistent in terms of your formatting. So what I mean there is that all of your headings are in the same font and style, you know, whether that's all caps or bold or whatever it may be, but be consistent throughout the document. So I'm going to pause after the next slide and see if there are any questions. So if anybody in the audience has questions or things that are coming up so far, now would be a good time to start typing them in, and then maybe we'll have a couple of questions teed up. Okay, so on the next slide, we have the common sections that you want to include in the resume. Of course, everyone's going to have some sort of a header at the top that's going to contain all of your contact information. We do get questions from people about, you know, do I need to include my address? Does anybody really send things through the mail anymore? And the answer is yes, you should include the address, because for many recruiters, that's a signal of where you're located. And so, you know, if you're a company and you are a, you know, St. Paul-based company, most recruiters are probably going to take you more seriously if you're here somewhere in the Twin Cities area. So make sure that you do include your location on your resume. For those of you who do have more than 10 years of work experience, including a professional summary may be useful. So I'm going to go into a little bit of detail on the next slide after we maybe have some questions about what a professional summary should include. But otherwise, if you have less than 10 years of work experience, there's no need for a professional summary. Sometimes we'll get students asking about including objectives. We don't see objectives on resumes anymore. That was a convention that probably went out of favor 10 or 15 years ago. So generally objectives are not needed. And then you will have your experience section, which is going to be the bulk of your resume. I recommend having most alumni include their education after their experience. And then with any additional real estate or space that you have, you can highlight other things that are important to you. So things like leadership, skills certifications, maybe volunteerism or community involvement. That's kind of an area that you have a little bit of flexibility with. But before you include these things, again, really ask yourself, do they support the message that I'm trying to convey with this resume? Do they add value? Do they help sell me as a candidate? Okay, so I'm going to take a little break there and see if there's any questions.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, we got quite a few lined up here. Just a quick follow-up on the address part. One person asked, should you include an address if you're looking to relocate and you do not live in the city of the company you're applying for? How do you maybe make that bridge as far as if maybe to get over maybe you know, if recruiters are looking for Twin Cities centric addresses, how do you frame that up?
Yeah, that's tough. So, you know, the unfortunate thing here too is that a lot of recruiters are going to be using LinkedIn, and that's like a whole nother webinar. But, you know, between LinkedIn and the resume, you know, at some point it's going to, I think people are going to figure out where you're located and kind of what your story is. So, unfortunately, I don't have any great guidance on that one. I think you should include, I think you should include your address. You're going to have to somehow, though, speak to that. So maybe it's in a cover letter that you talk about. Although I am currently living in the Minneapolis-St. Paul area, I will be relocating to Seattle by such and such a date or something like that. So, this isn't the only marketing piece that you've got working for you. You have the cover letter, you have informational interviews, you have all these other things working for you as well. But I know from experience that it tends to be more challenging when you are an out-of-state or an out-of-town job applicant. Rob, do you have any ideas?
I would agree with that, Stephen. I mean, I think it is a definite challenge if your current home or mailing address is not even in the same state as the job you're applying to, but I think you can overcome it to some extent by, yes, maybe putting that into a cover letter, or if you reach out directly to the company. I wouldn't necessarily put it in your professional summary that, hey, I'm looking to relocate to San Francisco for a senior financial analyst role, and here's why. But yeah, any other way you can do it. Often, getting jobs is about who do you know, so you may be better served to get on the telephone and talk to somebody versus do it all through a database with an electronic resume submittal, and then just kind of go essentially into a black hole. So
there's some really good resources that are available online for doing an out-of-town job search, and it outlines some of these challenges that we're alluding to. It's challenging. It's really, really tricky because a lot of recruiters are going to see that you're not in the state, you're not in the geographic market where they are, and they're not going to understand. They're not going to understand why them, right? So it becomes so much more important for you to have that face time with people. So to do the networking and to do the informational interviewing. I've seen students land awesome jobs, across the country and across the world, but they rarely did it by applying for those jobs online, right? Yeah. So they did it through networking, they did it through the relationships piece. You've really got to get somebody at least on the phone, if not, to sit down and have a cup of coffee with you so that you have an opportunity to sell them on why you're an awesome candidate before they just put you into the no pile because you're not in the right city. That's a great question.
Next question, I'm going to try to combine two of them together because I think they somewhat get at the same thing. So this would either be someone like re-entering the job market after 10 years, or perhaps let's just say you have the candidate who's maybe re-entering after being at home as a parent for a while and maybe has only had volunteer and board management skills during that time, and then kind of in the same vein, the career changer who's maybe has over 10 years of experience, but none in the field that they're applying for. So, within the construct of a resume, how can you be creative about positioning yourself as far as either those skills or those, soft skills or things like that aren't necessarily things that you can, measure quantifiably on a resume? How do you approach that?
Yeah, so those are both challenges, and they're both really, really common challenges. For the person who has a question about re-entering the workforce, I think that what we have seen is that there is much more openness, and the recruiting community is much more forgiving and understands that people on-ramp and off-ramp in their careers at various times. And so for the person who is maybe a little apprehensive about putting their resume together because they haven't necessarily been doing formal paid professional work for maybe 10 years, I would encourage you to let go of some of that. My guidance is actually the same as it was for the person who's doing the out-of-town job search. There are some recruiters who are going to see your gap in experience, and they're just going to say, you know what, this is too big of a risk, or is this person really ready to come back, or what are they trying to accomplish here? So again, the importance of getting people on the phone, getting in front of people, telling your story, helping people understand what it is you're trying to do at this stage in your career is so important. And I'd say the same thing goes for the other scenario too, right? So somebody that's a career switcher, a lot of recruiters, they're going to look at the resume, they're going to look immediately at your most recent employer, and they're going to look at your most recent job title, and they're going to look kind of at all of your job titles and all of your employers. And if it doesn't make sense, it's really easy for them to just put you right into the no pile, even though you've got really, really relevant, great transferable skills. So again, that door gets shut before you even have an opportunity to explain yourself. So same thing with the career changer. Career changers are going to have to do their job search a little bit more through networking. They're going to have to create those opportunities to get in front of somebody and slow down that rejection process by saying, you know, here's what I've done in my previous career. I'm looking to parlay these transferable skills of A, B, C, and D into a new career or into a new industry in blank, you know, with your company. And here are some of the things that I've done that I feel like are really relevant. You're going to have to do some of that work for the recruiter. And the only way you're going to be able to do that is if you slow down the recruiting process and get in front of somebody and do that networking and meet those people face to face.
Just one other quick question, and then I'll let you jump back into slides. We have a recent alumna who's in her second job out of college, and she asked, should I not include any objective statement or professional summary? Should my layout just go from header to experience? It feels empty that way. Can you speak to that?
Yeah, I mean, I think a professional summary for somebody that only has a couple years of work experience is really not necessary. They, you know, they'll be able to quickly glean from the resume what it is that you have to offer and hopefully what it is that you're kind of going after. So no on the professional summary, and I would say, you know, objective, same thing. Recruiters, they don't need to see an objective, right? You're applying for a job, they know what you're looking for, and most people simply just don't write solid objectives, right? And that's the reason why I think they've fallen out of favor, because everybody wrote the same thing, right? I'm seeking an opportunity to advance my career and take on a role that, well, you know, everybody says the same thing. So I feel like if you've got something to say, whether that, you know, would be an objective or a summary, you should be able to communicate that just as well through a cover letter or through an email of introduction where you're asking somebody to sit down and talk to you over coffee. I feel like those are much better opportunities than doing it on the resume.
Thank you.
Okay, so I'm going to jump back. So the professional summary, again, this is really just relevant to those people who maybe have 2 pages, they have, you know, 15 or 20 years of work experience, and they want to provide a little bit of an anchor for the audience before they dive right in. I think there are rules for what belongs in a professional summary, however, and so here are kind of my 5 bullets on this. I think the professional summary should be short, you know, 2, 3, 4 sentences tops. It should be almost completely objective and completely factual. If it contains adjectives, that's usually some indication that you're missing the mark. There should be nothing in it that is your opinion or your subjective appraisal of yourself. It should allow a recruiter to know what they can do with you. So when they read it, they should immediately know, okay, I understand this person's function. I understand this person's industry. I know where they've situated themselves. I know what their niche is, and I know what they uniquely offer. It should also be the anchor for the rest of the resume. So on the next slide, John, here are a couple of things that I say, again, are my list of yeses and nos. So yes, include things like how many years of experience you have, and call it out. You know, so I would call myself, you know, a career or an executive coach and a career services professional with 15 plus years of experience, so that somebody right away knows what they're dealing with. You should call out what functional role or functional roles you held or are looking to hold. You know, ideally there's a nice match there and there's that consistency, but that's not often the case. If you want to say a little bit about what you are particularly good at, and here, this must be evidenced in the resume. So, you know, don't say that you're particularly good at leading a team or you're particularly good at analytical thinking or problem solving. You know, these are all opinions, and they're things that anybody could say about themselves. So if you want to say that you are particularly good at new business development and prospecting of new clients, that's fine. But then I want to see that in the resume later, along with some results. Also include differentiators that maybe most candidates aren't going to have. So, if you have an advanced degree and that's going to be a selling feature for your next job, you can include that. So differentiators, things that not everybody else can say. Do not include things like these flowery adjectives that I see a lot. So people will say, like, I'm an inspiring leader that motivates my team to drive results. And it's all just kind of fluff. And I often will sit with somebody and I'll say, you've written this really nice, these really nice statements about yourself. I could also write these exact same statements about myself, and I'm a career coach, and you are trying to go for this job in investment banking. So the fact that we can both claim those statements means that they're not useful anymore. Any skills that are disputable, things like that is what you're going to want to get rid of. Okay, on the experience section, you're going to start with your most recent experiences, and you're going to work backwards. And I generally think it's a good rule of thumb to devote more space to your more recent experiences and less space for the earlier experiences. So again, if you're trying to fit all of your work experience onto a page, even if you've only had maybe 2 jobs, you should be spending more time talking about your current or your most recent job. That's what the recruiter's going to want to focus on. That's what's going to be on the top of their mind for the agenda. So you should give them that information accordingly. And I say in terms of bullets, we'll get a lot of questions about how many bullets should I have. For your most recent experience, I think 4, 5, 6, 7 bullets. For earlier career experiences, maybe just a couple. Because, again, this is your opportunity to set an agenda for the interview. And if you include just as much detail about your early career experiences as you do your most recent career experiences, it kind of sends a signal, right, about what you want to talk about. So you want to focus on those more recent experiences. You want to focus on those most relevant experiences. So use your real estate wisely. Rob called this out a little bit earlier about resumes demonstrating growth and demonstrating expanding scope over time. A nice thing to do after you've taken a first stab at writing the resume is read it backwards. So start at the beginning in those earliest career experience and read it toward your most recent experience and ask yourself, does it look like my job has grown? Does it look like I've taken on more responsibility over time? Bullets should be a mix of bullets that are kind of 1 line, 2 lines, maybe even 3 lines long. Be careful with long bullets. I think once you get to the 3rd line, it probably could use a little bit of pruning out, but most of your bullets should probably be 2 lines. They should fall onto a 2nd line. If they're all too short, I'm going to assume that you're not communicating the so what, right? You're not communicating the result. And then keep in mind that not all positions need bullets. So if you just kind of have something that you did early on in your career, it's not relevant, it's not something you want to talk about, but you don't want to lose that and look like you have a gap on your resume, you could also just include the employer, the city, state, the job title, and then the dates. And that's just as well. All right. After you've done that, there are some little tips and tricks that I've included on the next few slides for adding impact. One pet peeve that I don't like to see on a resume is when people start a bullet with responsible for, or my duties included. Again, what this basically communicates to a recruiter is that this is my job. I didn't necessarily do anything above and beyond my job. I kind of came in every day and I did my job. So even just those words, responsible for and duties include, I think means that you're approaching the resume from the wrong perspective. Start all your bullets with an action verb, and use past tense for those activities that you're no longer involved in or those jobs you no longer hold. This will ensure that you're being consistent in kind of how the bullets are being phrased and how they're read. SEO or search engine optimization is super, super important. which is why we always encourage people to start before they sit down to write the resume, to really start and have a good understanding of what those industry and functional and company buzzwords are. These are the things that will just jump off the page when it's done well. And when you go to transfer some of this stuff to your LinkedIn profile, the search engine optimization becomes even that much more important, because recruiters are using LinkedIn all the time to actively search for talent out there in the marketplace. And then the next 3 slides, I'm going to talk about how you can, and I'll show some examples of how you can use your bullets to communicate scope and communicate results and communicate outcomes. So what's up on the screen now is an example of a missed opportunity to communicate scope. So this looks like something that was taken right from a job description. So the before is, I completed due diligence on a wide range of merger and acquisition targets. So kind of thing that maybe you have in your job description, you cut and pasted it around your resume. But it doesn't really help me understand what you can handle, what you can manage, how many, how much. So we've added in a couple of numbers to communicate scope. So we talk about the number of M&A targets. We talk about the size of the targets in terms of their assets. So our after, just by adding a few numbers, we now have a much better understanding of what we're talking about, right? We understand the scope, we understand the complexity of the work that was done. So throughout your bullets, after you've crafted them, go back through and ask yourself, all right, where could I add some numbers? Where could I add some dollar amounts? Where could I add some figures and metrics that will help people understand the size and the scope and the complexity of what it is I'm trying to communicate? You can also communicate goals with your bullets. So before, again, we're taking a basic job responsibility, supervise 2 departments, totaling 25 staff members. So there they communicate scope by telling us how many staff members, right? So certainly a team of 25 is more complex than a team of 5, but we don't really know what they were doing. We don't really know what the goal was in terms of these departments. So we've added, in our second bullet, a little bit of detail about what these groups were doing. So direct a 25-person marketing and promotions team to execute strategic initiatives that align with the company's marketing vision and ensure achievement of the vision's financial year plans. So if you are feeling like a lot of your bullets are short, a nice little tip can be to add the phrase "in order to" at the end of the bullets. So in order to what? You directed to supervise these departments in order to do what, right? Ask yourself that question as you go throughout all your bullets and make sure that you're not missing an opportunity to communicate what your goals were. And then last, you can also communicate results or impact. And so this is really the best. This is kind of what you should be striving for in virtually all your bullets. So before is I developed and I implemented marketing strategies, but we don't necessarily know if they were good at it, right? We don't necessarily know if they were successful. We don't know any of the outcomes. We don't have an understanding of what would not have happened were they not developing and implementing these strategies. So the after says I directed channel strategies, new brand positioning, and a $4 million budget for a specific food line, and it resulted in a 23% increase in sales for this particular period of time. So again, throughout your resume, go back and ask yourself, am I telling people what the outcome was? Am I telling people what the result was of all these bullets? Okay, and then after you do that, I like to have people go back and trim the fat. And for me, trimming the fat means getting rid of those things that are irrelevant. They're not one of the competencies that this particular audience is looking for. Vague, generic statements. So people will say things like, I collaborated with the sales team to generate new business leads for the organization. And again, it's what's missing there is the results. What's missing there is the outcome, right? The specifics. Trim out any skills that are assumed at this level. Trim out skills that can be assumed from your job title. So if you are applying for a job as a financial analyst, let's say, to go back to my previous example, most recruiters have a basic understanding of what that role looks like, particularly if they have some experience recruiting types. So you don't necessarily need to state the obvious, right? Tell me what else. Tell me what more you did than your typical financial analyst. And tell me what makes your work as a financial analyst specific and different than all the other financial analysts that are out there. And then last, trim any redundancy. Trim out any repetition or redundancy. So once you've already kind of communicated or illustrated that you have a certain skill or competency, you don't need to keep on saying it over and over and over, right? Use the valuable real estate for other things. So I have just 2 more slides left. John, are there any questions?
Yeah, we do have some questions if you want to do some like a lightning round or something, or.
Yeah, let's do. Let me say one more thing about this, and then we'll do a quick lightning round. So prioritization exercise. After you've got all your bullets, move to the top. Those most relevant ones that demonstrate skills from the job descriptions, anything that communicates that impact, right? So any bullets that have a dollar sign or a percentage sign or a number, those are good candidates to move to the top. And then, move to the bottom, any of those day-to-day responsibilities, if that's all you've got, move those things that can be assumed from your job title, your job description, skills you've covered elsewhere. Ideally they fall off the resume completely because you've trimmed the fat well enough. But if they are still on the resume, at least move them to the bottom. Because most recruiters, again, are doing their job super, super quickly. They're not going to read it all. So make sure that the bullets that are front and center are the most impressive. All right, so should we take some questions?
All right. How do you account? So this is from someone who's worked for a company that's been acquired multiple times, but the team that he's worked for has remained unchanged. How do you best reflect that on a resume?
Yeah, you probably will have to say something like, company X, and then in the parentheses, formerly company Y, right? So you might have to say, like, formerly what the company was known as, and then that way you don't need to, keep on making it look like it's a new role and a new position. I think that would address it.
Is it useful ever to include a brief summary of the company, like, for example, what they do to provide context for an industry and/or content knowledge?
Yes, yes. Particularly if you were talking about a smaller mid-sized company that might not have that name recognition, it can be very valuable. So a little brief description, maybe in italics, that is the company, what they do, what industry they're in, and maybe something about size of company, so number of employees or annual revenues.
If you've worked for a company for 25 years, been in multiple roles, and only part of your work applies to the job you're interested in applying for, how is it best to reflect that on a resume without including gaps?
Yeah, I think people want to know the story. And Rob, I don't know, maybe you can chime in here. People want to see the story, they want to see the trajectory. And so I would display all of the different job titles you had. So you're going to display the company name once, and then you're going to nest all the different job titles underneath it. And I just wouldn't include a lot of detail for those jobs that are not as relevant. Rob, what would you say there?
Yeah, it can be a little tricky, 25 years with one company and moving around to a lot of different divisions or departments, but I wouldn't take it off. I mean, I would leave it on there to show that nice tenure. Ideally, somebody would have gotten promoted within a lot of those moves throughout the company. And then obviously it would be nice if the more recent experience was a little more closely tied to what somebody wants in terms of that next step in their career versus something that somebody once did 20 to 25 years ago.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. How important are gap spaces in a resume? Should I mention months and years or just years?
Oh, I like months. Rob, do you want to see months and years?
Yes, typically, and certainly for somebody who's still early in their career, where maybe they've only been working for 3 to 5 years, I think it's pretty important to show that, the months, yes.
I think if you don't, it, again, can raise a red flag because people assume that you're trying to conceal a gap.
Yes, yeah, that can be true also.
This is from someone who's maybe worked for a few years, a more seasoned professional. At what point should you still list or not list school grades and scholarship if they are strong? Like, so I'm assuming like maybe like honors designations or things like that.
You know, I think once you've got work experience to stand behind, I think the work experience goes first and the education. I think most employers want to know where you went to school, what degree you got, what you majored in. I don't know, John, you're probably, Rob, still looking at GPA potentially as an indicator of potential, right? But
Well, there again, it's got greater importance for recent grads, but ultimately, long term, your experience becomes the king, and you can take it off. Now, again, if you were the 4.0 student and the valedictorian or the summa cum laude person, it's not necessarily a bad thing to leave it on there because it's sort of a marketing or selling point for you on the resume, but it's absolutely not necessary to have it on there.
yeah.
And then just last quick question. If you have a PhD or maybe some other type of advanced master's but are looking for industry jobs, should you include publications on your resume? And if so, how many publications would you include?
So I actually just asked a panel of recruiters yesterday, and I was kind of showed up a little bit. So I would say no, do not include them, particularly for industry jobs, unless it's with a company that's going to value that. Some companies do value it. So I'll give you an example, like a Medtronic. Medtronic has a lot of people that work there that are industry professionals, but who also engage in research, or at least have engaged in research. So if it's a company that has a history of employing scientists, things like publications and patents can actually be pretty important. But again, ask yourself, is it relevant? If you're looking at job descriptions and there's no indication in any of those job descriptions that they're going to care about that, I'd say take it off. It can actually create some distance and alienate the recruiter a little bit, I think. So again, super impressive, but impressive is not relevant necessarily.
Well, we've hit 1 o'clock, and I really want to thank Stephen and Rob for sharing their insights and expertise with our audience today. So thank you so much, both of you.
Thank you.
Thanks, John.
All right, and that's the conclusion of today's webinar. And again, if you're interested in some of the programs at the Carlson School, it's carlsonschool.umn.edu/programs. And also, of course, the U of M has tons of great graduate degrees in a variety of areas as well. Again, final plug for today's Give to the Max Day in Minnesota. And if you'd like to join us, you can visit us at umnalumni.org/GTMD. And lastly, just want to thank all the members of the Alumni Association who make initiatives like this webinar series possible. Thank you. Through the help of and your support, you make our global community of alumni stronger. And if you'd like to join us, visit umnalumni.org/membership. And that's all for today's webinar. Thanks, everyone, for joining us. This will be up on our YouTube page probably in a few days. And I will send an email out to all the participants who registered. So you have a wonderful day, and go Gophers.